to share an opportunity that we have through, because we're not meeting in person, we typically have an auction in conjunction with our seminars. But since we are online, we had produced orchid note card packs. And so we are selling these as our fundraiser for the year. These are packs that are taken from 4 of the photographers here at the Great Lakes Judging Center. We had Lynn O'Shaughnessy, Ed Cott, Katie Pear, and myself. We had submitted some pictures, and then Lynn down selected 2 of the best from each of us and created note cards. These cards are, I don't have my notes with me, approximately 4 by 5, and they are blank inside. So if you're interested in getting a pair or getting a set of these, visit the Great Lakes Judging Center's website, which is gljc.org. And the information is there for payment and shipping. And yes, we will ship to Canada, so that is also available. She is in Southern Ontario Orchid Society member, where she contributes to putting together orchid displays for the show. So Alina, thank you very much for joining us and for your patience as well. So let me stop sharing and I will give.
So good morning to some of you, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Alina Furtak, and like just said, I am a student judge and a member of the Toronto Judging Center. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today and present my research on Phalaenopsis stuartiana. After the 2 very interesting presentations yesterday, I hope I will not put you to sleep with my talk. Both of the speakers yesterday showed us so much color and focused more on the novelty breeding and mostly on the subgenus Polychylus. My research was inspired by this very interesting and not often mentioned, and in my humble opinion, a little underestimated species of the genus Phalaenopsis, subgenus Phalaenopsis. In this presentation, we will zoom in on this particular species. We will talk about its characteristics, how to tell it apart from other Phalaenopsis species, and what it has contributed and continues to contribute to the hybridizing trends. To that effect, I will show you some examples of the primary hybrids, as well as some examples from further generations to illustrate the traits passed on by this species. Finally, we will touch a little bit on judging, specifically on judging quality awards where Phalaenopsis stuartiana is concerned. So starting with the nomenclature and taxonomy, today there is only one name that is officially recognized by the Q word checklist of selected plant families, and that's Phalaenopsis stuartiana. There are several formulas and varieties listed as synonyms, but only the forma nobilis will show up from time to time in the AOS award descriptions. And if you notice, Schilleriana is mentioned in some of these synonyms, and we will come back to that and talk about Schilleriana in a moment as we progress through this presentation. So what makes a stuartiana a stuartiana? It is an epiphytic monopodial orchid endemic to Philippines. It is found growing on trees and shrubs in proximity to water, including seawater. It likes hot and humid conditions, and it can be found at elevations from 0 to 1500 meters. It has a short stem, fleshy leaves, which are up to 35 centimeters, and according to some sources, even 46 centimeters long. And about 8 centimeters wide. The leaves are mottled gray-green, underside maroon to purple. Stuartiana has pendular, heavily branched inflorescences up to 60 centimeters or 90 centimeters long, purplish in color again. Stuartiana does not like to be confined to a pot, and because of that, it's perfect for our basket culture. When hanging, it makes a stunning display, although most growers prefer to stake the plant for showing. Stuartiana was first collected by Boxall in the year 1881 in the northeast corner of Mindanao, Philippines, and it was described by Reichenbach the same year. Originally intended to be named for Boxall, but in the end dedicated by Reichenbach to Stuart Law of Hugh Law and Company, which was Roxall's boss. That first description mentions the sepals on the outside being sulfur yellow, seen in the picture here. And on the inside, the interior halves of the lateral sepals, the same sulfur yellow with the cinnamon blotches. As mentioned, Stuartiana is local to Philippines, Mindanao, shown here in red. It has also been introduced to Panama, where it has suitable growing conditions. Stuartiana, belonging to the Phalaenopsis genus, or subgenus rather, is commonly known as one of the moth orchids. The natives call them mariposas or butterflies. Flowers are delicate in substance and texture, but slightly heavier than Schilleriana, described as paper-like substance, which is considered to be a rather poor substance by the AOS judges. It is slightly fragrant. Flower natural spread or size is 6.3 centimeters on average, but it varies from 5 to about 7.8 centimeters in size. And Stuartiana averages 35 flowers per inflorescence. It is one of the many phals with patterned leaves, and pictured here on the far right. It is worth noting that the pattern is not universal and changes from plant to plant and also along the plant's life cycle. Assumption here is that it was meant to mimic the surrounding environment in nature. As the plant matures, the mothing pattern changes somewhat as well, and the leaves can become fully green when the plant is much older. Here are two examples of botanical plates from the 19th century. Please note the leaf pattern again. Each example shows very distinct leaf pattern for Stuartiana, and it is worth noting that plants with both of these patterns can be found. If you happen to be a stamp collector, there are several stamps depicting this orchid. Since the leaf pattern is very variable and considering other characteristics of the plant, when Stuartiana is not in flower, it is practically impossible to distinguish Stuartiana from Schilleriana. In this picture, we have both, and Stuartiana is on top. But can you really tell a difference? Even though they both come from Philippines, they do not share the same geographical location. Stuartiana is found in Mindanao, as mentioned, but Schilleriana is found in the north province of Luzon. Since Stuartiana was discovered some 20 years after Schilleriana, this can probably explain some of the synonyms created in those early days, using Schilleriana as the main species and Stuartiana as the form or variety. Example here would be Schilleriana variety Stuartiana. So how can we tell them apart? The major difference can be seen in the flowers. They have distinct coloration, distinct shape of the lip and callus, and of course the already mentioned natural distinction or distribution can help us tell them apart. Since both have white formas, to really distinguish them, we need a closer look at the lip. Like most Phalaenopsis, Stuartiana's lip is trilobed. with the side lobes raised up and the mid-lobe jutting forward and downward. The mid-lobe is wider at the bottom part of the bottom half of the lip, as compared to Schilleriana, where it's a little wider higher up. So the mid-lobe shape and the callus can tell us something. And stuartiana has also longer tendrils and straighter. The callus is V-shaped with a horn-like projections, clearly shown here on this drawing. If we look at the close-up, in this picture, you can also clearly see the difference in texture. Note the crystalline texture of the petals and sepals compared to the waxy texture of the lip. So let's take a look at some of the forms of the Phalaenopsis stuartiana and the awards for this species. Today, there are 44 total awards for stuartiana worldwide, 33 of them being the AOS awards. Stuartiana's flowers are, like we said, predominantly white with distinct markings on the sepals, the lip, and sometimes the petals. But they also carry a strong yellow gene, which in some forms is very dominant, and it passes that to its progeny. Example here is the forma nobilis. Yellow forms are usually with bigger flowers and are less floriferous. Here we have two examples of the AM awards. The Paraíso tropical pictured here being the highest AM award to date. In the other forms, yellow is visible mostly on the lateral sepals and on the lip, including the back of the flower, as we have seen before. Other forms listed as synonyms are punctatissima or punctulata, and these are described as a form or variety where the spotting extends to petals and the dorsal sepal, and we have two examples pictured here. There is also variety bella, described as having dark purple markings. I haven't been able to find a picture to illustrate that. The spotting stuartiana can be cinnamon, maroon, or dark purple, so they do vary in coloration. Here we have a couple examples of some cultural awards, both certificates of cultural merit, where we can see why stuartiana makes an impressive specimen plant. Stuartiana has very few rivals in floriferousness, and it passes this trait to its offspring. The flowers often open at the same time, and they are very nicely spaced due to the branching of the inflorescences. So here we have the stuartiana tuki, which has the highest CCM award to date of 87 points. For certificate of horticultural merit, we have just two to date, both shown here, and they were given both to the yellow forms. And if you notice, the one on the left, Nederland, is very vivid yellow, and it has been confirmed by SITF that it is indeed stuartiana. Here we have an example of an HCC award, and using this picture, I would like to bring to your attention to the shape of the petals. As we said, they are rhomboid or rhomboid ovate. And what I really like is the filling of the space between the petals and the dorsal sepal. It almost looks like a jigsaw puzzle with no space in between. Some of the less desirable cultivars will have some windowing showing, which is especially visible when flowers are not flat. But generally, stuartiana and schilleriana have this both nice fitting, nice shape fitting going on between the petals and the dorsal. And I feel this is very pleasing to the eye. In this picture, you can also see the flower in profile. And this shows another characteristic of the species, the slight capping of the sepals. You can see it in both the dorsal and in the lateral sepals. The lip is curved, as mentioned, and jutting forward. And with the side lobes raised up, it almost looks like it wants to embrace you or hug you. And with the coloration on the interior half of the sepals, this looks like a landing strip that is very inviting and grabs attention of the pollinators. I have looked for this information, but I could not really find anything on specific pollinator for this species. It is believed that there are multiple contributors here. And also, this species can self-pollinate. I also want to show you the close-up of the animal-like patterns of the spots. This is making them very attractive, and again suggests possible tendency to mimicry or camouflage, similar to the variable leaf pattern, and it is very attractive. The color concentration on the interior half of the lateral sepals is by no means unique to stuartiana. We have other examples like Alina or Mentawanensis, for example, both seen yesterday. But the spotting in that area is being passed to progeny, and it's very characteristic to stuartiana. So let's talk about hybridizing. Since it was first discovered about 140 years ago, stuartiana has had a vast influence on what we see today in the Phalaenopsis hybrids. And it has undeniably contributed to this genus's commercial success. It is currently number 5 with 400 offspring, or a little more than 400, as the most hybridized Phalaenopsis species. But it only ranks number 17 in the category of the most awarded Phalaenopsis species. So definitely the offspring has more success of getting awards. The documented hybridizing efforts date back to the 19th century, and a huge influence in using stuartiana is thanks to the French company Vachereau and Lecouf, formed in the 1886, and still operating today under slightly updated name. Vachereau and Lecouf used stuartiana extensively, crossing it with large whites and back-crossing them many times. Results were medium to large whites with beautiful spotting, and some can have up to 20 times stuartiana listed somewhere in the background. In addition to being the top 5 most hybridized Phalaenopsis species, stuartiana ranks also very high in the species with most awarded offspring. I don't want to bother you with all the statistics, but you know, just to illustrate that out of the primary hybrids, the 400 primary hybrids, 71 of them have won a total of 195 awards, which basically translates to the 18% of the offspring being awarded. And that's just first generation. OrchidWiz lists 16 generations of stuartiana right now, and close to 29,000 of total hybrids with stuartiana in the background. And of course, many of them will have stuartiana on both sides of the parentage line. Looking at the statistics, when I was doing the research here, it became very clear that there is a strong correlation between the floriferousness and the awardability of the offsprings. So that's something that I would like you to keep in mind. So how does stuartiana contribute to hybridizing trends? Yes, you guessed it. The main traits that are being passed on are the floriferousness and the branching of the inflorescences. Those two characteristics, along with the ability of preserving the clarity of color, are the most desirable traits. And that's why stuartiana has been bred back and back again into the complex hybrids to bring that floriferousness and color quality. Being predominantly white, these crosses, the crosses get clear colored flowers with no mudding, and the pigments tend to coalesce or fuse in spots and patterns depending on what the other parent brings, resulting in very distinct dots, lines, etc. The mottling of the leaves is unfortunately recessive, but it can come back in future generations if another mottled leaf parent is introduced. Stuartiana also contributes the yellow gene, which we'll touch on in a moment. So, major contributors to following trends: multiflorals, and that includes miniature and novelty multiflorals. Also a major contributor to whites and French spotted hybrids. So let's take a look at a few of the primary hybrids so that we can see the influence and what stuartiana is passing on each of the examples. We'll start with the most successful one, Cassandra. Cassandra is a cross between stuartiana and Equestris. It has 25 total awards to date. It has been hybridized extensively. It has over 220 first generation offspring and close to 4,000 total progeny. And it's worth noting that 24% of the first generation hybrids are awarded, which shows the improvement over stuartiana's 18%. Here we have an example of stuartiana Petite Snow, and this cross brings the best of the two parents. It shows rounder flower form, well-balanced proportions. We can see the spotting on the interior half of the lateral sepals, which comes from stuartiana. But from Equestris comes the pink blush and the very dark contrasting lip. Hybridizing using stuartiana dates back to the 19th century, as we already mentioned, and Cassandra was the third ever registered cross for this species. Cassandra has been remade many times since the 19th century, and it is still a major contributor to multifloral lines. As you can see, Cassandra comes in many color forms. And did I mention it has 4,000 progeny? So just want to mention some of the most successful ones because obviously we won't be able to see them all. But you might recognize the names. Carmela's Pixie, Big Lot, Little Hull, Little Netsuki, Brother Sandra, Timothy Christopher, and the list goes on and on. Cassandra also comes in some very nice peloric forms, and I wanted to show that because they also bring a different coloration. Here we have obviously some very strong Equestris influence. It is the most peloric prone species in Phalaenopsis, but also that strong yellow gene comes through, is being passed on, and also with the attractive spotting, it makes a very interesting flower. Moving on to another example of the primary hybrid. Here we have Fleur de Val, cross of stuartiana and golden amboine. This cross has larger flowers than stuartiana, with natural spread of 7.7 centimeters. Some of them have more red in the lip than the one pictured here, which has been noted as a very attractive feature of this cross. Unfortunately, it only has two total progeny, indicating that it wasn't very fertile and able to reproduce further. It's a shame because we can see a clear influence of stuartiana in both the lip shape, the markings, and that non-fading yellow gene has come through. So it's a very attractive flower. Moving on to another example, this is Cassandra crossed back to stuartiana. So it has 75% of stuartiana in mix. No surprise that it's very similar in size and floriferousness to stuartiana itself, resulting in a larger flowers and in the attractive spotting. But as you can see, it hasn't been awarded a lot. Also, while a little bit more fertile than the previous primary hybrid, its progeny did not produce many awardable plants. So this is an example where this effort was pretty much abandoned. Here we have another example of stuartiana crossed with another species, with Gigantea. And Gretchen shows an improved substance, very nice color concentration on the lip, and the color markings evenly distributed throughout the flower. So this is something very characteristic with stuartiana crosses, that it distributes the color, keeping the background color intact, but coalesces color in the spots. Again, apparently not very successful for breeding because it only has a 7 total progeny. This cross of Ludemaniana and stuartiana has been much more successful than the previous examples. It has over 9,000 progeny, and some are being still registered. So there were new registrations in 2021. And progeny is definitely more successful in getting awards than the actual primary cross. This one has only 3 awards. But here you can see the very attractive spotting again being distributed throughout the flower with a very nice contrasting lip. And again, here we can say that it's all about the spots and stripes. We go just crazy for them. This cross has very many successful progeny. Among them we found Rosy Charm, Leopard Prince, Tianjin Pearl, Sogo Vivian, Sogo Berry, Little Gem Stripes, Hilo Lip, and many, many others. So I think it's worth noting that it's a very successful hybrid. And since we have compared stuartiana and schilleriana earlier, I wanted to show this cross even though it has no AOS awards to date, just to show you what the offspring would look like. I think personally it's a very attractive flower with very nice spotting and this pink blush. It is also very floriferous. It has 48 flowers on average, and natural spread of 6.0, so just slightly smaller than the average stuartiana. Interestingly enough, yesterday, Drew Goddard showed us this cross remake with the yellow form, Forma nobilis, and it came out very attractive, sort of pastel peach. And to be honest, I would love to add this one to my small collection, as I appreciate the softer colors myself and unique color combinations, and I thought it was very attractive. Hopefully we can finally see some AOS awards here too. So we'll just have to wait and see. Speaking of the primary crosses, Drew also mentioned yesterday crossing stuartiana with Capuacensis, and I will be keeping an eye on the results of that cross. But both of these examples are confirmation that the breeding with stuartiana still has a lot to offer. Wiganya has 17 primary offspring to date and 22 total progeny, which shows that it is still very much pursued by hybridizers, and the awards usually show in later generations when one of these parents is reintroduced to the line. So again, a lot of good genetic material in both parents. Just to illustrate the intergeneric hybrid possibilities, I couldn't find too many of these, but this one is quite successful. So cross with Phalaenopsis monachica results in this Mildred Jameson with 17 awards. Very attractive flower. This one actually boasts the most awards after Cassandra in the primary hybrid, generation, but has only 4 total progeny and none of them awarded. So intergenerics do not seem to be very fertile. But I really like to point out the nicely balanced flower shape. The flower is fuller than monachica. Note the interior half of the lateral sepals, copying the stuartiana intensity of the color in this area. Very attractive flower. So let's talk about next generations of the crosses. And here I would like to focus for a moment on multiflorals. And to begin with, I want to touch on what does multifloral mean when it comes to Phalaenopsis. The term itself first appeared in the context of roses, and it simply means many-flowered. It was first used to describe a rose shrub with clusters of small flowers, pictured here. When it comes to orchids, multiflora can mean different things for Phalaenopsis than for Paphiopedilum, for example. For Phalaenopsis, multiflora have branched panicles resembling a tree, distinguishing them from the standard or classic Phalaenopsis. They also tend to have a profusion of flowers, which are arranged all around the spike, and not shingled like in the classic Phalaenopsis. They are sometimes called the minis, miniatures, or pixies, likely because the current multifloral breeding trends in the Phalaenopsis genus continues towards the miniaturization, color, and fragrance. And this includes going after mini reds, yellows, mini harlequins, and producing compact plants desirable for commercial success. Stuartiana has almost all of these characteristics of the multiflora Phalaenopsis, except for the miniature size. So if you remember, the leaves can be more than 12 inches long, and the flower spike can go up to 2 or even 3 feet long. So definitely not the miniature size, but contributing many other traits to the miniature multiflora Phalaenopsis lines. For a moment, I'm losing my voice. Here we have two examples of the second generation stuartiana progeny. Both are the offspring of Cassandra and are very successful, 22 awards, 18 awards. They actually place as the top 2 in the awards of the second generation offspring. And they both are used very often in the multifloral breeding lines. And here is the next generation of the 2 hybrids we have just seen. So these are third generation of the hybrids that we just seen, and back crossed with Phalaenopsis equestris. So going towards miniaturization again. And again, those 2 are the top 2 most successful crosses in that generation. So definitely seeing a trend there. And knowing that the multifloral breeding trends are towards miniaturization and branching, there is no surprise that these 2 have been so successful. Do you remember the tendency for color concentration or coalescence? The white picotee seen here can be one of the results of that. And this is often seen in the stuartiana progeny. In this section, I would like to feature some of the progeny that have contributed in breeding trends in different ways, and show some of the examples of what is possible using stuartiana's genetic material. And starting here with a couple of examples, I wanted you to note that starting from the second generation, we will start seeing stuartiana parentage influence on both sides of the crosses. And in my presentation, I marked that with a star. So for Little Netsuki, this is a cross of snow leopard and Cassandra. There is a clear stuartiana influence with the concentration of the color, the spots and their distribution. A very nicely shaped flower and very attractive. Another example would be Timothy Christopher, again, very successful cross. This one is Cassandra crossed with Aphrodite. And here the branching inflorescences and floriferousness in general is are the main traits being passed on. These flowers, when they open, at the same time, tend to produce very nice specimen flowers. This one looks almost like a wedding bouquet of sorts, very attractive. Showing a couple of whites. So the background color being kept very pure for Liu Fantasy. The little color that's left is concentrated as this pink halo around the column, which makes it a very charming effect. And another example of miniature harlequin with Nankung's 4:55 p.m. Again, second generation with stuartiana on both sides. Both very successful crosses. On this slide, we have 2 examples of what I call breeder's choice. Both have seen several mentions by hybridizers as one of their favorites to use for further crosses. Sogoberry has no awards, interestingly enough, by itself, but it has been extensively used for further hybridization. And I think we can agree that this very full dark lip is very attractive. Little Hal has been prized specifically for the candy striping, which also is a very attractive trait. And it is actually a very good example of miniaturization effort. So with each generation, we are going smaller and smaller here. Couple of examples of the early novelty breeding. Here I want to emphasize the yellow gene being passed from stuartiana. This can show in future generations, even if the parents do not show any yellow forms. Reds need the yellow gene to produce a true red. Brother Sandra might not be very red in this picture, but it definitely shows the red potential, and it has been used to breed the red orange lines in future generations. Both have very nice flower form and are quite floriferous. And a couple of examples of some newer crosses. In both cases, you probably can't tell stuartiana influence just by looking at them, but in both of these cases, stuartiana was introduced to increase the floriferousness of the crosses. And here we have one of my new favorites. When I first put together this presentation earlier this year, it had no awards, and I said that it will be only a matter of time. Just a few months later, we have 2 awards already listed at the AOS. Both stuartiana and philipinensis were used to increase the floriferousness of this cross and the branching. And we can see the stuartiana spotting around the column and the lip. And the signature yellow lobes come from philipinensis. But this being second generation, it has about 25% of stuartiana in it. And the picotee is believed to come from Mycolitziae, which is one of the grandparent of one of the parents here. But even if so, stuartiana has definitely enhanced it by evenly distributing the color. And you can see that nice picotee on both of the front and the back of the flower, which I think it's very attractive indeed. Unfortunately, both mottled foliage genes from stuartiana and philipinensis are recessive and did not get to pass on to this hybrid. And I believe the owner of this plant is in audience today, so thank you for letting me use the pictures for my presentation. I wanted to touch on some complex Phalaenopsis hybrids. And this is just to show you how complex can we get. So this is an example of stuartiana being added several times in the breeding line. And this family tree shows 7 generations, but there are 4 generations more that are not shown. And the examples pictured here, they all been awarded, and they all show clear influence of stuartiana. So you can basically, take a closer look and pretty much guess that there is some stuartiana in the background. I promised you a couple minutes or a couple of comments about the judging. So this topic comes a lot, and that's why I wanted to include this in my presentation. And we will only touch on the quality awards and skip the cultural awards here, because that's a totally separate topic and we can talk for hours about that. But you will often hear that judges focus on the big, full, flat, and flowers in the Phalaenopsis genus. And that is true to some extent. Just by looking at the point scale for judging Phalaenopsis, you can see that the most points are being attributed to flower form and the color of the flower. However, I just want to point out that this is not always that cut and dry. When we talk about judging species, I was taught to look at the characteristics inherent to that particular species. So what are you comparing is apples to apples. And second, that the quality of the flower needs to be looked at from many different angles. For stuartiana, for example, we note the flower arrangement. It goes around the flower spike. And it's not, so we are not expecting it to be, to have that shingling effect like in the other classic Phalaenopsis. Stuartiana also has a lighter substance than most other Phalaenopsis. And so it has the tendency of the sepals to cup slightly, as we've seen before. And the petals have some tendency to recurve back, as you can see in this picture. So that that is often showing in the species specimen. This brings some of the windowing, that recurving brings some of the windowing effect. And I believe that nature knows what it's doing, and that both of these characteristics are natural tendencies that were there for a reason. And they're probably meant for the flowers to flutter in the wind and to better attract the pollinators. But with giving awards, we also want the best specimens to be propagated further. So we tend to look at the desirable characteristics at the judging, when we are at the judging table. So, for example, we would look for the dorsal sepal to be somewhat larger and broader than the lateral sepals. We would look for the petals to be broad and flat, and filling that space between the sepals and the petals. So basically, we look for things that contribute to the overall appeal of the flower. It is my personal belief that as judges, we should be mindful that in order to support orchid conservation efforts, we must support the natural tendencies of each species and the tendencies that they show, and be able to award the stuartiana for being the best stuartiana and not the stuartiana trying to be something else. And I realize that is a very thin line. When it comes to judging hybrids, the key word here is improvement. And that can mean many different things. Looking at the parents is very important in order to compare and make the assessment. Size usually matters in some way or form, but we look at the individual segment sizes and overall proportions, and not only at the flower spread or overall size of the flower. So, okay, true. The AOS Judging Handbook says the size of the flower should be equal to or greater than the geometric mean of the size of the parents. So what about when we're breeding for miniatures? Well, again, it's not a perfect science, but I think that good sense and experience usually prevails, and the overall plant proportions and breeding light directions, if it can be determined, is taken into account. A lot of influence in judging comes from previously awarded plants. Once a benchmark is established, it is easier to determine how the plant in front of us contributes to the future direction of the specific hybrid or line and its potential success. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention. I hope you have enjoyed finding out about the history and progeny of this species. I personally enjoyed doing the research leading to it, and it has been a very enjoyable way of learning about orchids. To get to the materials presented here, I used many sources to compile this presentation and to present the most objective view possible. And lastly, if anyone is interested in becoming a judge, please reach out. Thank you.
I'm still here. Thank you, Alina. Well as this is Dave, and as well as we got off to such a great start, I got a text from Mei Ling that her internet went out.
Aww.
So Mei Ling is not amongst us. So I have been called into emergency service here to wrap this up. One thing that we forgot to tell everyone before we got started with your talk is that attendees are not able to use the chat function. So if anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A, and I'll pick them up as they pop onto the screen if you have a question. And in the meantime, I'm going to try to get a copy of Mei Ling's filler talk up and running, and then that gives, oh, here's a question that came right up. You guys are right on it. Okay, this is from Deb Bodai, who is in the New Jersey area and very active in the AOS. And Alina, she thinks you did a really great job. So, and I agree with her.
Thank you very much.
I actually have a Cassandra, and I have for quite some time. And I think I still have 4 seedlings, and they all bloomed out differently for me. And so I still have them, although the scale like them too. I have to be very careful with that. So I think it has something to do with Equestris. I think scales are automatically attracted to Equestris. So, okay, just a couple minutes. Oh, here's another question here. Oh, this is from Allison Bossert. I hope I pronounced, and she also very much liked your presentation. So
thank you so much.
Kudos for you, well, 3 if you count me, so far. Before we get on to our next, let me do, since I'm multitasking here, forgive me just for a moment.